So Creature Commandos, this is technically the first project out of the gate for the brand new DC Studios. This is their
Yep.
first showing officially, which is something we have known when James Gunn, about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago at this point, gave that full lineup of announcements, all the upcoming projects from DC Studios that was going to encapsulate this first chapter, Gods and Monsters. He did note that Creature Commandos would come out before Superman arrives next summer, which is a bit of a non-traditional thing to do to sort of kick off things from an animated series standpoint, something that's not on the big screen. But it's sort of like a soft introduction into this universe before we really hit the ground running with Superman. But obviously James Gunn has played in this world before. He directed Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad, so he's returned to DC Studios, and now he's taking this animated series Creature Commandos, and he's doing something that he's kind of become a master at, taking a ragtag group of misfit different characters, bringing them together. They have a mission that they have to undergo, and this is like Task Force-esque X adjacent. They're not the Suicide Squad, but they're like the D-list Suicide Squad. So when the Suicide Squad is like, the D-list Justice League, well, now Creature Commandos is even further down the rung. How can we take even more obscure characters and make you care about them and love them and hopefully grow even more fondly of them? And I do believe that this series is going to have 10 episodes in this first season, and they just rolled out the first 2 this past week on Max. And so with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it to you. What did you think so far about Creature Commandos?
Yeah, when I first heard or seen that this was announced and James Gunn informed us that this would be the first thing to kind of start the DCU, I think I was pretty excited to see what was going to happen here, because he wasn't starting it in a way that was traditional in any sense of the word. If it was just Superman, we'd be like, oh, of course you got to start with Superman. But he decided to kind of, like you said, soft launch this universe with this ragtag team in Creature Commandos. And Creature Commandos is so interesting because, like you said, they are kind of a D-list Suicide Squad, and there's actually not a ton of Creature Commando source material out there. There is some stuff you can read. There is some stuff about some of these characters. Some of these characters do appear in other things. Of course, Rick Flag is in Suicide Squad, but I was like, yeah, let's start with some people nobody really knows. It's almost like, let's start with an animated version of Guardians in a way. Like, we don't know any of these people. Who are they? Where did they come from? And he forces you, I think, to kind of learn about them. And not only that, but a lot of people are so interested in how the DCU was going to start. It's like, of course they would watch, this TV show. So very excited to watch Creature Commandos and getting into it, man. So far it's a very edgy, fun show that kind of does feel like it's similar to in the vein of some other DC shows that were kind of happening at the time, like Kite Man and Harley Quinn, but only slightly more serious, because it is part of a larger universe. But so far, my favorite thing about it is just the characters. I really love the Bride and GI Robot. It's just really cool, I think, to learn and see some of these people get put to screen, because you're like, okay, I know who you are, but how are you going to fit in this story? And to be honest, so far we don't actually have a ton of story in these first 2 episodes. We've only put together so much, and I think as time goes on and more story begins to unravel, hopefully I think I'll fall in love with them more. But so far, really all we've really gotten is introduction and a little bit of action, and so I can't wait to get into it even more than we already have. But so far I'm enjoying it. I like the way everything looks. The animation is fine. Some moments are like, ooh, that's really cool. Other moments you're like, I see you had to not necessarily take shortcuts, but there's not much happening in this frame, and people are just talking. So yeah, we'll have to see what happens from here, but so far I think it's a good start.
James Gunn, I mean, who better to write an entire series about people you don't know, and in all likelihood by the end of it we're going to be feeling very emotional about our attachment to them. I think that that's been the consistent thing, and he's taking characters that feel like outcasts, that feel like they're rejected from society. They feel like that they're not accepted by their peer groups, whatever the case may be. He's done that just time and time again, and somehow he's able to just flip everything on its head, and all of a sudden at the end of it you're like, wow, I see myself in that person, or I can understand and empathize with like what they're going through. And I anticipate that's likely going to be the case here. On the surface, it can appear like a really raunchy, goofy sort of animated show, and I think we'll certainly get all of that stuff. We're going to get the James Gunn style of humor, the violence, the over-the-top, adult-oriented stuff. He's also extremely good at that. But I do anticipate that it's going to kind of surprise us, as we dive deeper into the characters, into the story, and we're going to learn a lot, and we're going to say like, wow, okay, he's actually hitting me and in my emotional core on a different level that we probably don't see all that often, maybe in some other animated shows. I think it's
Mhm.
likely, to tread some similar water, in terms of what we're seeing with Invincible, where it's like, wow, I really do care about these characters and just like what they're going through on an emotional level. So I'm very, very excited about the rest of Creature Commandos, and I think it's a really, really good start. These first 2 episodes, some good action, some great, obviously, some character introductions to just get us started. And overall, a really, really cool look as well. I like what they do with the animation here and how they make
Yeah.
things look. I think it paints a pretty good picture in terms of how the the new DCU, can sort of differentiate itself from Marvel. And James
Mhm.
Gunn has spoken a lot about this, and he's talked about how, we're not really following the MCU model. It's more of a Star Wars approach where it's going to be mixed
Yeah.
media. They're not building towards like one big villain and one final blow
Mhm.
off film. It's going to be interconnected, of course, but they're doing something that's a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more linear in that respect, and just kind of tell stories on an individual basis and have some interconnectivity happen in the meantime as well. So I think that that's a good approach. You got to be different. You got to do stuff, sort of in a unique way, especially since we've kind of seen that formula perfected by Marvel already. So
Mhm.
Creature Commandos, it's a good start. I don't anticipate, a ton of people will necessarily watch it. So Superman still will be like,
Oh
obviously, the
yeah, the
huge
big
launch.
beginning.
It'll be the
Mhm.
big thing that most people are like, okay, this is like the beginning of James Gunn's DCU. But if you're like a real hardcore fan, if you watch all the DC animated stuff, if you have Max, like if this is something that you're aware of, it's a good way to just like get accustomed to like what they're going to do. It is interesting though, because there is like still overlap with the former DCEU. Like that is
Right.
also still a thing. And they
Mhm.
acknowledge that at several points in the show. And he's
Yeah.
talked about some of the things that they're going to have to address, and even in Peacemaker as well, like some of the
Mhm.
things that they're going to have to, I guess, sort of retcon and deal with and sort of right around, to make that clear distinction in terms of like what was old is now new. But I don't know, any thoughts on that? Because like Amanda Waller pops up in this show and she's
Mhm.
referencing previous movies that have happened technically in the DCEU, but now that this is like a new start, do you anticipate that that's still going to like throw people off and kind of be like a point where it might cause some confusion just moving ahead, and how they can possibly deal with that and maybe get around some of those questions that might arise, just because there is going to be certainly be overlap from that old universe?
Yeah, maybe ever so slightly. Like for like I don't think necessarily Peacemaker, a lot of people I think we're taking that and be like, "Oh, this is some hardcore DCEU stuff." You know what I mean? And he's come out and said anything you hear in these shows that is referenced in any of those old shows, that's canon. And if it's not talked about, it's not talked about. And I think that's an okay approach. I think we know Peacemaker was his. I don't think he wants to throw everything away and just be like, who's Peacemaker? What does he do? You know what I mean? I think he wants to keep some of that meat and potatoes, especially of Peacemaker. That first season, and so I think there will be some people that's confused for sure. I think that'll happen, but I think anybody that pays attention enough to know what Peacemaker is, to know what Creature Commandos is, I think they'll understand, and maybe some of that stuff will, won't be so hit over the head with it. It just depends on, I think, how who the casual viewer is and what they're talking about. But I think the casual viewer is like just coming into this thing. I think they know what they need to know, and I think if the same thing, if they just coming into Superman, I think they'll know what they'll need to know. I don't think it'll be too confusing. At least I hope not.
Certainly. Well, we'll certainly see over the course of the next few months, especially as we gear up for the release of Superman next July. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on Creature Commandos. If you've checked out the first 2 episodes on Max, hit us up and let us know what you think.